Fantastic. So, John, maybe I'll hand it over to yourself. And again, thank you so much for being here today. I know some of you we have one-on-one EIR meetings throughout the next little bit, so John will be involved in that as well.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, thank you, Blake, and very nice to meet everybody. I'll just give a quick background first on myself here. So, John Bodalai, I've spent, as Blake mentioned, the last 25 years essentially in the software technology field, leading sales and marketing initiatives across primarily North America, but also rest of the world. In the UK and now even where I am currently in Middle East and other jurisdictions, Australia. My focus has been, I've worked at all sorts of companies. I've been with very large companies that have mature or stable products that we are launching into new verticals and new markets. And I've also been in startup organizations where the company's unknown, the product's unknown, the value proposition is, under development and trying to launch those applications. I've also sat in the chair of being a CEO of a startup company. And so I've sort of seen a lot of different examples of how to launch successfully and how not to launch successfully. And so hopefully today I'm just going to share some of my experiences and best practices and principles that I know. Frankly, right now I'm working for a company, Carbon 60, and I'm going through the exact same exercise in terms of, how do I build that right value proposition? How do I obtain those sort of key area or key customers, whether they're pilots in a different vertical, and then how do I make them successful so we can grow our market share in the organization? And so to me, this is a lot of fun and a lot of hard work at the same time. So just some examples when Blake asked me to put this together, I thought back and said, okay, so the perspective is, different companies and how do you run successful. So here's some examples of ones I've personally worked on over the years. And by the way, some of these have been successful and some of them have not been successful. I've learned some different best practices. Motorola Solutions out of Chicago was a highly successful project. Royal Bank, we tried one in the UK and the pilot wasn't successful. And I'll talk about some of the reasons of that. But then ultimately we ended up selling to them globally. So that was a success. Magna was another one that we worked on. In my previous company, worked a successful pilot with Honda and launching a pilot program. And then now they're deploying across Canada and some other ones here. GE out of Kentucky, we worked on a very successful pilot project, and I did with Hire as well. I think of other ones that I don't even have on the list, like Nike, which is everybody's darling customer that you want. We ran a very successful pilot with them and ended up selling the solution across the globe. And again, as I said, I've also had lots of ones that haven't been successful as well too. So hopefully I'll share some of those best practices. And for this presentation too, I'm going to try and take the perspective that most of you are international companies and trying to launch into North America as a target market. So, some considerations and things that you should think about as you try to do that as we go through it. I don't know if everyone knows Michael Jordan. He was one of the most successful basketball players of all time. And in comparison, for those that don't know, it may be a Roger Federer or Cristiano Ronaldo or someone like that, but he's in that same league. And I love this quote because I think about that. When I look at a lot of the startup companies that I'm asked to help coach and mentor, I see a tremendous amount of talent. You very talented people. And some of the applications, and Blake shared with me a list of the products and services that are represented in this group that are launching. It's exceptional. Like the talent of the product and the talent of the people is outstanding. So my goal in this is to say, It's not just talent that wins that championship, it's the teamwork and intelligence. And that's what I'm hoping to depart a little bit of knowledge on today. And it's the same way I work with sales and marketing teams. It's not so much, everyone's got the best product and the best people, but how do you organize and funnel that so that you can, focus those energies and win that championship? So here's the framework I've developed, and this has worked for me in the past, and I'm going to reference different examples. But if I were trying to launch frankly, anywhere, whether it's North America or even in your own geography, here's what I would look at first doing is, here's build the value proposition. And we're going to go through that exercise in terms of how you build the correct value proposition. 2, selecting your pilot customers. Some take the approach of, hey, I'll take anyone who wants to do business with me, right? And just sort of randomly jump into a pilot with anybody who will talk to me. And I don't favor that approach. I favor a very strategic and methodical way of trying to find your best pilot customer. Then 3 is positioning the pilot. Like, how do you successfully position that with those target prospects that you want to do business with? And 4 is trying to gain their commitment. We go through it. General guiding principles. So I'm going to go through those 4 steps that I just referenced. But top of my mind always when I look and say, okay, I want to work with a company and I want them to be a pilot. See, these customers, those initial customers are probably the most important customers for you, because you can spend a lot of time and a lot of effort and they don't necessarily help your company move forward if you don't select the right pilot. So my message in this is to really be a little bit more selective than you probably are thinking right now, and select and qualify those right business partners that are going to really help your company take it to the next level. And so some things I look for there, first and foremost, is mutual partnership. Like, if you're giving your product away for free and they're not really invested in the success of your pilot, I walk away and I don't even invest any time with those organizations, because they're not going to be collaborative and not going to help you build and give you the advice and input on your product and what needs to be done at an early stage, which you so critically need. So if I don't feel like, if I feel it's one way and I'm doing all the giving and I'm not getting any support back from them and collaboration, I walk away from that prospect right away. I don't want them as a pilot customer. And similar to that is the executive sponsorship. If I'm dealing at a low level in the organization and there's not an executive who's engaged and involved, similarly, I don't spend a lot of time, or I go ask for that. And if they're not willing to give that, I would walk away from it. I'm going to talk extensively about this through the presentation, but really put yourself in that customer's shoes and look at minimizing their risk. And I won't say more about that now because we're going to spend a bit of time talking about that, but that is so critical. Put yourself in that customer's perspective and look at, how do I minimize their risk? And then, but at the same time, you also want them to have something at stake or at risk, because if they don't, then it's easy for them to let the project fail. So there's this nice balance you need to make sure that you've minimized their risk, but they're engaged and have something at stake. We'll talk about nothing for free. I don't advocate, I've seen before many times where we go, hey, we'll give you a product free, try it for 30 days, try it for 60 days, and let's see if it works. And we'll do all the work and heavy lifting and you just try it. Generally speaking, and again, going back to the point above, those don't work. You want them to have something at stake, and a little bit of financial pressure is a good thing. The final thing would be documentation. When you get into a pilot, you have a very different expectation of, what you see as project success, and probably your client or customer does. And so it's really critical as you go through this, you document that, and we'll talk about that a little bit further. Okay, I'll pause before I get into the 4 stages. Any questions, Blake, or keep going?
Uh, Nothing from the chat, but anybody else? I think we're good. If we keep going, I'll keep on monitoring the chat and see if anything pops up.
Okay, terrific. Okay, so first stage, building the value proposition. So I'm going to talk about the wrong way first. So, and I see this used extensively is when you guys are all great at building a product. And I typically see what companies do when they're starting out of the gate is they focus on the product features. I built a great new reporting tool. I built a great new, healthcare application for the market. And what they tend to do is they focus on the features and benefits of the product. I see this in websites. I see this in collateral. And when they're targeting prospects, it tends to get drowned out in and creates a lack of interest on the customer product because they hear this over and over again. And catch yourself. Like if you start to see that you're using words like biggest, best, more efficient, more effective, reduce, expenses, increase income, like these are words that companies will hear over and over and again from hundreds of different potential companies like yourselves that are trying to get them to engage and do business with. So focusing on the features and benefits of your product is not the most effective approach, in my opinion. What I like to do is step back and really look at the industry benefits and pains that you have. Like, what industry problems are you solving? What known or unknown risks? So let's say I've got a cybersecurity application that I've built, right? It's great if you're talking about, hey, here's some known risks that are generally known by CIOs in the marketplace that you're targeting, or even unknown risk are even better. Like, hey, are you aware of these things that you're probably not even thinking about? Or even from like a healthcare application or any other application, hey, do you know that there's a risk that you're probably not even thinking about? Is a great way to sort of investigate and show some thought leaderships to companies. Companies are also interested in a competitive advantage, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. So, what is your solution doing that's going to give them a competitive advantage? So I spend some time researching their competitors in the marketplace. A really good one is, and related to that, so I look at the industry and then I look at the organization. And kind of everything boils down to me into 4 points. And you have to link your product or your solution and what it does to what I say is the CEO or board's objectives. So I'm either growing revenue, like how do you specifically grow revenue in the organization? How do you reduce expenses in the organization? There's one that around brand value. Like when we were working with Nike as an example, it was obviously all about the brand. Like, how are we increasing their customer experience to increase their brand value? And then the fourth one is always around protecting reputational organizational risk. Like, I've seen some, either cybersecurity applications or privacy or things of that nature that, customers are deploying, and there might not be an ROI specifically to them, but it's achieving some other benefit. And a typical one is risk. So like when I look to build along these lines, I tend to favor, focusing on a specific industry or geography and being an expert on that. So, if you're building, I saw one like a smart device for apartment buildings is one of the companies here. Like you may look like, okay, there's apartment buildings and that could be either residential or commercial or some other sort. I would look at, okay, should I have a specific industry focus? Maybe it's solar buildings, right? and being very specific about that sub-industry that I want to work with. And what I typically like when you're an entrepreneur and you're launching your company, the tendency of most entrepreneurs that I've worked with is they go very wide and they try to, because they don't want to limit market. So they look at multiple industries and try to cast a net as broad as they can. What I favor is like picking one or two or three industries to start. You could always build more, and going very deep and trying to develop some sort of specialization. And there's two ways you develop that specialization I look at. One is you can do it by technology. So you have something very industry specific in terms of your technology. And the other way is just what I call industry knowledge. So like, for example, the last company I was at, we didn't have the funding to really build some technology differentiators. So I said, we're going to go very specialized into a vertical. And we picked automotive manufacturers, dealerships, and we got to know all the industry terms, the issues, the lingo, the vernacular that those organizations would use, so that every time we went to talk to organizations like Honda, we could talk very intelligently about how they distribute cars to their dealerships and how dealerships operate and function. So we were very specific about that. I've included a couple examples here in the report, and I won't go into them. But for example, if I was going into healthcare, and there's lots of good data that I look at, and obviously you guys are probably doing this already. So if I was in healthcare, I would look at this, Deloitte report on healthcare trends. If I was selling to fintech or banking institutions, you can take a look at this PricewaterhouseCoopers financial services reports. I go very deep into like annual reports, investor relations, and I'm going to show you an example here. And mind you, some companies aren't always public, but if you are targeting an industry and say there's 30 or 50 target accounts in there, there's probably going to be several that are public, and that'll give you an overview of some of the industry information, the competitors, et cetera, that you want to look at. And I start to develop a point of view. Investor relations is a good point of view. And then I also look at their competitors. So, for example, if I were looking at, Magna as an example, an automotive parts manufacturer, I would look at some of the other ones in that space, including GM and Ford and others. Okay. So now I've developed that very strong industry knowledge. I've looked at some of the companies in specific. So now I come to selecting my pilot customers. And here's an example of one I specifically went through at an organ. And I apologize, it's a busy slide, but I wanted to show it to give you an idea of the process. So what we did is we started with an industry at the top. And then we did some preliminary research and we identified 30 companies that we potentially were interested in doing a pilot with. And then we went through a filter, and I'll show you the filter in the next slide. And we reduced that down to 15 of the top ones that we wanted to work with through this exercise. Then we built out very detailed company profiles, like targeting 10 to 15 people in that company. We could potentially reach out to that. And then from there, we executed what I'd call the sales and marketing plan to engage with those prospects and customers, right? And then as you went through it, so our goal was, we weren't just targeting one customer, we were targeting, in this case, 15 different customers. And let's say we got involved with them, and customer number 12 in that list turned out to be no good, or we weren't getting anywhere. That's okay. We'll add the 16th customer to that list. But we started again with a big funnel list, and we worked it down to a group we first wanted to do these pilots with, and begin the process. I'm not going to cover a lot today in terms of how we actually executed that plan. I'll talk a little bit about it, but that's everything from how we did emails, how we reached out to the CEOs with letters, how we cold called those customers. There's a whole sort of separate dialogue in terms of how you can do that. I'm not going to talk too much about that today, but I will cover on it lightly. So here's the criteria. So what I recommend in this, again, I apologize, a busy slide. The point of the slide though is when you're looking at which companies you want to do a pilot with, we scored them. We came up with 10 different criteria, and then weighted, and that's how we got from getting from 30 customers down to a manageable number of 15. Some common ones that typically we look for innovators. Like if you guys, we look for early adopters. So in other words, if the executive team, like the CIO and CEO, were at the organization a very, very long time, i.e. they were old and were close to retirement, so there were not a lot of innovators, we would score them lower. If they got, say, a new chief information officer, CIO in the company, and typically if you get a new person in or a new VP of marketing, we were looking at marketing organizations, or selling to marketing organizations. So if you got a new chief marketing officer or VP of marketing in the organization, they typically want to come in and make changes, right? So those were, we would score those companies higher. And then we would score them based on the overall revenue we could expect to achieve, and other factors like how, and so whatever your criteria is, and whether it's 5 factors or 10 factors, I recommend coming up with some weighting or scoring mechanism. So you could, because you could take potentially 100 customers that you could potentially do a pilot with. The goal of that is to reduce it down to a number of, say, 15 or 20 that you think are your first and top prospects that you want to target. Okay. All good, Blake?
All good. All good.
Yeah. Okay. So now we've sort of got the value proposition, which is that we're focusing on the industry and focusing on company values, and priorities. We sort of screened or developed a list of potential pilots. So how do we position that pilot with this? And I talked a little bit about this already, but when I'm, and again, there's various formats you can do this. We've done things where we write letters to CEOs and CIOs and clearly position how we want to work with them. We've done things where we work at a lower level in the organization and we send out, I'll call them emails. I won't call them blasts because they're very specific emails. We picked up the phone and engaged and tried to contact them and set up meetings to have a discussion about it. So there's various ways to do that. But the way you first sort of get them hooked or want to have a discussion with you is using some of these points here. And I'll show a couple examples. But again, you're first linking to that industry benefits or pains and how you're solving that problem. If I know it, I link to that specific CEO's organization goals. I was dealing with one the other day where, the organization said that they wanted, they had an issue with the privacy and security of their applications and had a project underway in order to more bulletproof their infrastructure, so and increase their uptime of application service. And I pulled that right off an investor relations report that the CIO presented to the investors. And I took that slide and I referenced that in the email I sent him and got a meeting with him, right? And saying, hey, I can help you solve this specific problem. And then what I do is I put 2 or 3, I'm helping either your competitor do it, or I've helped these 2 or 3 companies already do that. And if you're new and you don't really have that reference base, you can still, again, reference that point. I can help you solve this specific problem. And I got a meeting, right? And so I demonstrate the knowledge of that company through that by pulling that investor relations. There's a great book, Challenger Sales, which I reference and I coach salespeople on. It talks about how you be professionally disruptive. And And I think that's good. So you know what, you want to cause, it's okay to, how do I describe it, cause a little pain or friction in your email. Like some people are frankly too nice. I'm here to solve a business problem for you. You don't do, and I would be very professional though, but I would tell them, you do not do this well. You need help, and I'm here to help you. It's just like your doctor trying to have that discussion with you. You can have a very nice doctor that just makes you kind of feel good and really doesn't do anything for you. It's okay to be what, and again, I use the word I've seen people do it the wrong, where they kind of poke customer in the eye. It's not a good thing, but you want to be that good psychologist or medical practitioner where you're saying, you need help and I can help you with this. And so when you say you need help, you have to identify the symptoms of the problem to these guys, right? And say, I see these things that you're not doing well and I want to help you with it. But again, there's always a professional way of doing that. The other thing which will get everybody's attention really quick, if you can leverage this, is reference their competitors. Like if I'm helping their competitor save money, increase revenue, increase market share, that's the fastest way it's going to cause me to want to talk to you. So if you can, that's a good thing to use. And again, and I talked about known and unknown risk. If you're exposing something that they're not aware of, like, hey, you're going to be in trouble because you're not thinking about this, and I know this industry well, and I can help shed some light on this unknown risk that you have. That will also grab people's attention when you're positioning the pilot. And again, however you do it, it's a kind of a separate discussion, but there's multiple ways, whether it's emails, letters, direct calls, reference calls, to get that meeting. I'll give you a couple examples here. Like, say I was, and this is hypothetical, let's say I was targeting Magna, which is, and I know Magna, I've worked with Magna in the past, but I went to their investor relations presentation, and what I love about that is it shows a lot of good information. So you could see in here, there's a lot of different options. So the strong growth expected in Asia Pac, lightweight technologies are outgrowing the market, so that's a market opportunity, right? But they're having some challenges with currency and negatively impacting us. And then they're having higher launch costs here. So I see this, right? So then, so I would use this exact information, whether I'm targeting Magna, or let's say there's a smaller automotive parts manufacturer that isn't public. I would still use this kind of language and vernacular when I'm targeting them and saying, hey, automotive manufacturer having a challenge assessing their own internal capabilities around lightweight technologies, and then explain we're helping solve that problem, right? So now you've propelled yourself above most of the people that are trying to target these prospects, because you're demonstrating some thought leadership and industry knowledge when you're positioning your pilot.
John, quick question as we go through. I got a question based on, and I think it's great information, and I really like the investor. I didn't think about investor relations. That's fantastic. One of the questions from the group was, they think the biggest challenge is even getting somebody to open an email, and
Yeah.
maybe not necessarily the content is definitely a challenge, but even how do you get somebody to even click on an email? Like, is it a title, or is it when you say, or other strategies around what you think about that kind of challenge?
Yes, absolutely. There's a few things that I reference, and I've actually got some materials. I've coached sales teams on this, and separately, Blake, we can have there's a whole presentation around that too. But one is, it's very, I've got like 4 or 5 things. It's got to be short. Number one is, I do start with referencing that industry pain or problem. Like if I go back to, I will start, the first sentence will be something here. Like, again, the example I used when I sent that email out to that prospect that I wanted a meeting with, It was, you have an issue with cybersecurity that you've identified in your investor relations report, right? And so I identify, I don't even get into the, hi, how are you? I hope you're having a nice day. Like that's the mistake most people, because as soon as I see those and everybody, they delete right off the bat. So you want to start like, again, that professional disruptive is hit them right where it hurts, right? Up front, what you're trying to do. The second thing is I put in there is 2 to 3 references if you can. And mind you, that's a little more challenging if it's a startup organization. But there's ways you can work around that. And then I'm saying, I'm helping these 2 companies do this. And then I'm very specific about the return that it's delivered to them. Like ROI, we've saved them 1 FTE. We've helped them achieve energy savings of 10%. We've done this, right? And then the ask is, it should be very simple, where it's, can we, 20 minutes of your time to have a discussion about this, right? And so that's what I tend to focus on. And again, the mistake most people is they don't worry about getting into the product side too much. There should be like 1 sentence on the company in there, and they can reference your website and whatever if they want to learn more, and you can track that. But again, the mistake most people make is they start going in about their product and they, hi, how are you? Hope you're having a great day. We've built this new fancy reporting tool that, helps create easy to use reports and saves people time and efficiency and operating profit, blah, 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 right? And that's where you get the delete button. So disruptive statement, 2 or 3 companies, if you can, that reference them, specific ROI, ask for 20-minute meeting, right?
Sounds great. Sounds great. Zoltan, does that answer your question?
Getting there, yes. Thank you. I really think this is a big problem. I mean, you receive hundreds of emails every day. So that is, I mean, if your email is well planned and well read, or well written, but is not read, then
yeah. Well, I go back to absolutely. So the other mistake people make, and sorry, and again, I've got a whole separate discussion on this. I call this 9x9 plan. So you get one little sentence here. The mistake too is, and I use this as kind of a gauge, you should be targeting at least 9 people in a company 9 times. Like most people tend to just send 1 email and then they hope they get the pilot, right? I look for multiple, and that 9 experience. So I might, as an example, send a book to the CEO. Then I might send a letter to the CIO. Then I might cold call. Then I might send an email with case study number 1 week. Email with the case. And so that's the idea of targeting, like if you narrow this down. So, and then one of the reasons you want to target the shorter list of 15 accounts is more manageable. Now you go much, much more deeper into those accounts. And so by the time you're complete, hopefully it doesn't take 80, but you've at least hit them with 81 different touch points on your organization. Now you started to brand your organization, and you have a brand presence with them. And if every one of your contents are professional, industry thought leadership, and focus on sort of the business benefits, my guess or my hope is, and if you do that with 15 prospects, you're going to get your share of meetings out of it, is the goal. And yeah, so in answer to that, Zoltan, that thing, what I recommend is it's like build a whole plan that's just not like 1 email 1 week and then hoping, like it's like building up a 9x9 plan, is what I brand it or call it. So hopefully that helps. Yeah, but it's not easy. I absolutely, I go through this all the time, and I get the deletes too. So that good?
Okay, yeah.
And here's another tactic I've used, and I'm actually doing this now. So years ago, we were targeting Polaris. They make ATVs, motorcycles, etc. And so they sell through dealers, as an example. So what we first did is I had the team go out and we surveyed 20 of their customers across North America. And we created a survey specifically around our product and service. Like it was around customer engagement. So so we asked their dealers, which is their customers, how well does Polaris treat you? How well do they train you? What kind of incentives and promotions do they give you? How well do they do in terms of delivery of products and give you visibility to that, right? And so we went out and surveyed them. Then what we did is when we did that like campaign 9x9, I remember this specifically, we reached out to our target prospect and we said, hey, we surveyed 20 of your dealers and this is what they said about you. Here's what they said you did well, and here's where they said you need help. Again, that professional disruption. That guy was so anxious to get on the phone and talk to us. And one, we received a lot of credit and benefit from taking the time to survey their dealers. Number two, we were able to weave in information about their competitors. We explained to them, well, here's how Yamaha and Bombardier are viewed, which is valuable information to them, right? And so, and again, it sort of give them some calibration in terms of how well, what was the opinion of their customers. So if you're trying to, depending on your target market, think about your customers' customers and think about doing a survey with them. Even a brief one, like you may take 20 or 50 touch points. And so then if you start targeting your prospects and you've got some of that information, you become highly valuable. Again, for the principles I said, you're telling them something maybe about their competitors, you're telling them something they don't know, and you're telling them something about their customers. So, some examples is, I actually, once we were targeting a bank, so we surveyed branch managers. Like we created a simple, 10, 15 minute or 10, 15 question survey. And we called up 20, 30 branch managers and asked them their opinion on, how does corporate do training? How are performance reviews done in the organization? How are these sorts of things? And then when we were targeting our prospect, we were able to surface and bring some of that information to light, and it gives you an exceptional conversation point. And some things you can do is you could survey, again, dealers, you can survey their customers, you can survey employees, may even survey the competitors, and sometimes even their suppliers. And it gives you great, again, reference points now when you're trying to prospect with them. Sound good? Okay. Okay. So hopefully at this point, you've got your value proposition, you've got your target, you've started to reach out to them, and you're getting a little bit of traction. You get some folks that are interested, which is good. How do you gain commitment and secure the pilot? You've probably gone through maybe a demonstration or sort of painted the vision of what you do and how you can help solve their problems. So how do you gain commitment? And here's the things I look at, and some of it is repetitive and we've talked about it, but when I'm staring at a prospect and saying, okay, I want you as a pilot customer or my first customer, what do I look for? One, and I've talked about this already, is executive sponsorship. I make sure somebody's in, like I may have a project team member, maybe a manager of IT or director of IT that's involved, and who's on the day-to-day project side and is involved in trying to help make this a success. but I'll still tell that sort of manager of IT or director of IT that who's the executive sponsorship, and I want to meet them. They don't have to be involved in the day-to-day, but I want to be aware of the company. I want to make sure they're bought into the vision and objectives of the pilot, and they're there if we need them. And how would we need him or her? It's they can assign resources to the project, like financial or people. They can help change the scope. Like if we're midway through the pilot and we need to change a geography, or add resources, or they need to add resources, I look for that. I'm gonna talk about, so that's executive sponsorship. I've got separate slides on minimize and contain their risk, and talk about the financial, like how to price and financial commitment and documentation. So I'll talk about that separately. So manage your customer. I strongly encourage all of you. So when somebody's looking at you as, I want to do business with you, in their mind, they're thinking about what's my level of risk with this organization. And it's hard when you're a relatively new organization because you don't have the track record. You probably have an MVP, minimal viable product, so you don't have all the features and functions of the product. You may not have the balance sheet or the financials that if problems start to happen, like, can you withstand these sorts of things? So what you really want to do is put yourself in that customer's perspective and shoes of how do you help manage and minimize their risk? And you can do that. I just want you to sort of raise your conscious aware, because you think you can accomplish everything, right? And anything, because you're great entrepreneurs. They're looking at it slightly different. So, what I would look at is put yourself in your customer's shoes and look at some of these risk areas. And I've just highlighted the most common ones, and there may be others depending on, your particular product and service that you offer. Data residency is a big one today. So many of you are internationals and looking to do business in the North American market. So the first question likely out of your prospects' mouth is going to be, where's the data reside? So if you have a multi-tenant or a cloud environment or whatnot, where they want to make sure the data is in a jurisdiction where they can have access to it if they need to. And that's fairly easy to solve, like, depending on your technology and configuration, but, you can engage with local cloud providers, whether it's a public cloud like AWS or Azure, or organize, even what I do at Carbon 60, those companies can certainly help with that. And in there too, you build things into agreements on transition, like, okay, after the pilot's successful, or they want to get access to the data. So there's ways dealing with that, but just be sensitive and aware with that. Obviously, local certifications, like, is it, have to, and I saw some of them are hardware technology products. So, do you need the CSA and US UL standards? Make sure you go through that. Similar to the data residency is the privacy laws. And again, you don't necessarily, if you go public cloud or with other providers, a lot of them have the SOC 2 compliance, but those are things companies look for. Obviously, addressing confidentiality and legal agreements, and even establishing some sort of local presence and practices, and I'll talk about that in a separate slide. Policies and procedures. I see companies ask for that sometimes, like, show us your customer support and escalation process and things of that nature. So they want to know that. If I was dealing with an international company in say US or Canada, and they wanted, and I was interested in doing a pilot with them, the question they're going to ask is, okay, how do we support this locally? How do we implement this locally? Like, how is that going to be done? And so, quite honestly, sometimes it is feasible. You can do that from over, like I'm doing a pilot right now or for a customer in Dubai. And we're doing that all remotely. So it certainly is feasible, but you need to have that discussion with that prospect and customer, how you're, and assess their kind of risk tolerance to having it done internationally versus locally. If you do feel that you need that local presence, you can either hire somebody to do that, which we'll talk about on a slide, or you just partner with somebody, like partner with a system integrator, partner with another technology company, partner with a reseller to give you that local presence. But you should be aware and have that discussion. Financial risk. So they're going to, and we'll talk about this in a separate, this is that striking the balance. If you're a pilot or you're that first customer for them in North America, chances are you're going to have to wheel and deal and give them a discount and make it financially attractive. At the same time, you want that shared risk. I don't give it away for free. So we'll talk about that in another slide. And the other one I always think about and to be aware of is the reputational risk of the company. Giving an example, when I was Royal Bank, we were looking at doing a pilot in the UK. The CIO was in favor of going forward with the project, but his counterpart on the business side was not. And so he could have gone ahead with the pilot, but frankly, he was putting himself at reputational risk in the organization if it was not successful. And he was not willing to do that until he got the other person bought in. So the pilot was delayed and canceled. So I look at it and say, what's the company's like, what if your pilot's not successful? What if, like put yourself in the company's shoes and say, am I protect? And so you think about those off ramps and exit ramps that the company could have so that they feel assured that, okay, I can go forward with you because we're going to manage any back-end risk if it's not successful. And people tend to not to think about that because everyone is focused on the pilot success, and you're focused on, like, to you, there's only one way, which is it's going to work. And they believe that too on one side because that's why they're interested in what you do. But the executive and the CEO is thinking reputational and company risk on the other side, and you have to be aware of it and make sure you address it with them. Okay, so let's say, how would you establish, like if you need some localized presence? And again, you may be able to do it remotely, but you just should be addressing the issue. If you do need to, obviously local office address in North America is a good start. Companies are always more interested if you've shown some commitment already, like, hey, you've established an office in Toronto or New York or something like this, or have a first resource here who's helping to, with business development, customer success, customer support. I see a good first step, and I've done this too, is localizing website and content, language, and just the vernacular of US Canadian market. And again, talked about a localized data center. So, I've seen it where, we've had a data center in the EU for EU customers, and we have a data center in Canada, a data center in US for Canadian or North American customers. So gaining, I'm going to go through some comments on gaining commitment, pricing terms and considerations. And again, I'm not an advocate of a free pilot or free first customer, because I feel then that they don't have anything at risk and we cheapen the value of what we're doing. I'm okay with, we discount, we come up with some very favorable arrangements for the customer, but they should always attach some sort of value to your solution. I was with one company and I joined, and at first they were giving away like free training, like we install and implement it for free. And the goal was then, okay, once they did that, there would be transaction revenue that we would generate as a result of that. What we found is customers never implemented it. So when we kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and they kept delaying it because it wasn't a priority. So then we changed it so that, hey, we'll implement, we're going to charge you upfront implementation fees. will half of what we would normally do. We automatically started the transaction clock ticking after 60 days. So whether you implement it or not, there was going to be a minimum level of transactions that you're going to have to start paying after 60 days. And again, we would discount what each of those transactions were. But what it did is create that sort of incentive for that company. Okay, now I believe enough and I got to implement your solution because you're going to charge me whether or not it's running or not. And again, if we delayed it, then we wouldn't charge them. But if they delayed it just because they never got to the project, they would have to pay it. And so creating that kind of incentive for the company is important. Otherwise, they just don't have a vested interest in your pilot. What I do is, and I'm going to go talk to these bullet points, establish the full value early. So it's worth $1 million, and that's what it is. And establish that value early and then allow for the discounts. Don't start with, hey, I'll do this for $20,000 or $30,000 or $50,000, but always make sure they keep in context the full value of the solution at what you hope to get by the time you get to your 10th or 20th customer. Understand CapEx and OpEx of your customer, operating expense or how do they budget things? In some pilots, they have more capital to spend. In others, they don't have any capital to spend, but they have operating capital they can spend. So I always ask that question because you can structure your pilot that is more favorable to how they have budget dollars. And I do charge for upfront setup or implementation fees because again, it creates that financial anchor or commitment to the customer. And you can do it different ways. Ideally, you collect something up front. So now they have something vested in that project. Sometimes I spread it over a term, like or maybe milestones, like, okay, we're going to charge, let's say it's $10,000 to set up. We may charge $2,500 upfront, $2,500 after we do the design, $25 after we do the testing, and $2,500 we go live. Or you could do it, we'll charge you $10,000 once it's implemented and live. Any way you do that, I still think it's good to do. Term. Some people, and it's term and the next point, change management, kind of tied together. I find sometimes, and I've done this, been guilty of this. Hey, we'll set up our software and we'll give you 60 days to try it for free. No worries, right? And what we mistakenly do is don't tie it to the business benefits we expect to achieve in that 60-day period. And the time frame is one, too short, and two, all we've done is like turn the switch on, like made the application live, but we haven't gone through the change management of training their organization to use it. And so we don't get the business benefits out of that pilot. So make sure the term is long enough. It may be 5-6 months. It may, but just think about what it is, and that will allow you to achieve the business benefits so you can prove your business case with them. And then also make sure there's what I call this change management. So I've been involved in launches with customers where we're so focused on, okay, we turn the system on or get it live and running, but we don't spend enough, or the customer doesn't spend enough training and educating their team on how to use the application and the business benefits. And then what happens is nobody uses it and it fails. So make sure in terms of your project scope that you're spending a significant amount of time with the prospect talking about that. Who's doing the training? Am I doing the training? Or are you doing the training? Are we going to do the train the trainer approach? How many people are we going to train? What's the frequency of the training? How do we get that so we can achieve the business benefits that we're discussing in this pilot? And very important too, I try to determine, okay, what is pricing after the pilot? And that goes back to that first point. Like if your solutions, like the worst thing, and this has happened to me, is I give them a super discount for doing a pilot. And then they go, great, now we want to roll it out for the rest of the organization. And now that you've established that floor let's say it's $1 per unit for the pilot, well, it must be 50 cents a unit for the rest of the organization, because now we're going to roll it out to thousands of users. And so just make sure you're aware of that when you, and having that discussion with them. And sometimes I even document and say, hey, for the pilot, we're going to charge you $1, and this is at a discounted price from $2. And so that when you want to roll it out to all your users, it's now going to be $1.50. So just avoid that trap as you go through it. My final slide, and then open up to any questions. I'm a big believer in like a good documentation of the pilot. The challenge I see typically we run into is there's lots of great discussions and ideas that float around, and people have very different expectations of what that first phase or pilot would look like with a customer. So I'm very cautious of, hey, let's put it on paper, specifically what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. And that's important too. This product will not do this. Yeah, we've talked about visions of the product and things we can build out in the future, but it doesn't do that today. Today, the product does this, and this is all the pilot's going to do. Phase 2 and 3, we'll talk about this, and make sure that's clearly articulated, because what inevitably happens when you get multiple people involved and you start, like, typically your pilot customers or your early adopters, they're visionaries like you. They get why you're doing this. It's like the people that first line up to for the first, Apple iPhones or Apple Watches and so on. You don't need to sell them on the concept. They get that. They see the vision of that. They don't necessarily fret about the product details, but you want to make sure that's documented here so that you're meeting or exceeding the expectations. And then some of the other things are obvious here. You should have project reporting. Okay, every 30 days, we're going to have a steering committee and we're going to review the results and how we're doing, and you make sure that's documented. So hopefully, I kind of look at I love this Henry Ford quote, coming together is the beginning. And so that's when you're first engaged in discussions with your prospects and customers. And then you start to work through this and keeping together, you're making progress, you're working with them and you're starting to collaborate ideas. And then the final part is that working together is a success. And, hopefully, I've spent 20, 25 years trying to get customers to work with me and create pilots and launch successful. So, hopefully these best practices and tips are, we'll share some of the stories and the lessons learned that I've had and make you guys be able to achieve success a lot faster than I've been able to do it. So.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Ron. I appreciate the time, and I know we're just over the hour, but maybe if you need to drop off, no worries. But maybe we'll stay on for 5 minutes for a little Q&A. I have a question, but I was going to say if anybody have any initial questions right now. So,
can I have a quickie?
Yes, go ahead.
I am still, John, at the phase of trying to reach the client and getting him to a meeting. So in your opinion and your experience, what is like the optimal time frame for a polite follow-up? You mentioned the 9x9 rule. So what is I feel there is a thin red line between being lame and being too aggressive with follow-ups. So in your experience, what is like the average rule here?
Yeah, I generally say like a week, like every, if you feel really inclined, like I would start, say I send what I do is I do like an email and then a phone call, even if I leave a voice message, because now I'm building a little brand know-how and it would be that. And what I try to do, Zoltan, is then I will send another email the following week, but I change the content. So then I would say, hey, I sent you a case study or some industry thought last week. Here's number 2, and it would be different. And then a follow-up phone call. And again, even if you leave a message, I've actually, when people have marketed to me, if they're, professional dripping, right? drip, like a tap, right? Drip. And if they're continuously adding like innovative and emails and unique emails, they're not like those big blasts, and they do that week after week, I'll take a meeting with them, right? Assuming it's of something of interest.
You'll get tired.
Yes. Okay, you win. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And then make it easy, like a 20-minute meeting. The other one that again, depending on the size of the organization, one overlooked resource, like say I was going after a high level executive, I reach out to, most of them have executive assistants, and I will pitch, I would call them up and I would go, Zoltan, you don't know me. And I want a meeting with your boss, Jessica, as an example. I know he probably gets lots of requests for the meetings like this, and I want to be respectful. So I'm going to share with you what I'd like to talk about. And I pitch to them like I'm going to pitch to Jessica, and I get them on board to say, this is value. So, and I'll even set up a 15, 20-minute presentation with them at a high level and share with them, why I want a meeting with their boss. And so the executive assistants are great gatekeepers, but if you can show them that you are a professional and have something of real value, then, they're often a friend that can help you in that organization. So that's another tactic you may try to use too. But yeah, and answer your initial question, I think weekly is a pretty good cadence, assuming you have different value to share every week, right? I don't go necessarily, sorry, final tip on that is, I don't go, hey, I sent you an email last week, you didn't respond. I sent you an email the week before, you didn't respond. Like, no sense kind of hanging them out, because but just keep adding good content. It's okay to say, here's the second case study I sent you, or here's the second point of view I have on this subject area. Here's the third one, and reference it that way, but don't try to call them out with, you haven't responded to my email. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Olson. Anybody else, just in the last couple of minutes that we're here?
Hi, Mr. John. Thank you for the great presentation. I would like just to go over a bit on the pricing strategy, especially if it was a SaaS and you're talking about pilot, and it's not, you don't have that much quantity, so you're most likely to set the pricing on a value based. So could you just go over about this strategy? Thank you.
And so, Ahmad, yeah, nice to meet you. Your question is on the SaaS pricing strategy?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I tend to, so two general components. One is implementation, and then the other one is what I call the SaaS component. And that could be either like a transaction based, or it could be on a per user per month type basis, or other format like that. So I tend to separate the two. So I would charge them for some sort of setup or configuration or implementation fee and training. And again, it could be discounted. So let's say, it's $30,000. Okay, I'll share the cost with you. So I will absorb 15,000 of it, and you will absorb 15,000. And again, I would, hopefully you can get it all up front, but if they're don't have the risk appetite for that, you may split it, give me 5,000 up front, 5,000 when we're in testing, and 5,000 after it's live. You could do things like that. And then on the SaaS component of it, you could be flexible on that. So you may say, normally if you charge $5 a user a month, you may say, okay, for the pilot phase, we'll charge, $1.50 or $2 per user per month, or even allow them a ramp up in that. And then, at the end of the pilot, they have an opportunity to exit, get out of the contract if they don't do that. So, I just look for things that way. But then again, as I said, I would also say, hey, if you decide to keep going after the pilot is ended, here's what normal pricing looks like and for how long. It's a year or 2 years. And then if you want to add others in the organization, it may look differently.
Right on. All right. Thanks, John. That's great. I know, again, we went a little over, but I think it's great to get a couple questions in there. So great presentation. I think I'm taking a lot of notes. I'm sure everybody else is. We have the presentation. So John, it's okay. We'll share it with the cohort over email, so they can review as well. But everyone, thanks again for the time, and we'll regroup on Thursday with more workshops. All right. Any last words, John?
Yeah, great to meet great to meet everybody. Best wishes. I love helping companies. Feel free to reach out. Anybody has any additional questions, and hopefully everyone's safe and healthy, and we get the chance to meet in person at some point. So, thank you.